When President Donald Trump arrived, the atmosphere immediately shifted. Love him or hate him, one thing was undeniable. He had presence. Every camera lens followed him. Every eye in the room watched his every move. Known for his bold personality, sharp tone, and unpredictable style, Trump was never one to blend quietly into the background. He thrived on confidence, energy, and control. But this meeting, this one, would be different. Across the grand table sat the President of Italy, calm, composed, and diplomatic, the kind of leader who spoke softly but carried tremendous influence. He was known for his intellect, his respect for tradition, and his belief in the power of words used wisely. From the very start, their styles could not have been more different. One bold and outspoken, the other steady and deliberate. As the cameras rolled and translators prepared for the exchange, the world waited for a typical round of polite statements and rehearsed gestures. But that's not what they got. What happened next left even President Donald Trump, a man who had faced some of the toughest interviews, debates, and political battles imaginable, completely without words. The two leaders exchanged a few formal remarks about trade, cooperation, and shared values. Everything was perfectly civil, until Italy's president leaned forward, looked Trump directly in the eyes, and said one quiet sentence that would change the tone of the entire meeting. In that instant, the air in the room seemed to freeze. The translators hesitated. The cameras caught the moment. And for the first time in a very long while, President Donald Trump didn't respond immediately. What Italy's president said wasn't just diplomatic small talk. It was a truth bomb, a message so sharp, so unexpected, that it cut straight through the noise of politics and left one of the world's most powerful men utterly speechless. But to understand why those words hit so hard, we need to rewind a bit. Before the meeting even began, there was tension in the air. The kind of quiet, invisible tension that only happens when two powerful worlds are about to collide. President Donald Trump's visit to Europe had already made international headlines. Every country he stepped into was buzzing with anticipation. From his bold remarks about trade agreements to his fiery comments on global policies, Trump was, as always, being Trump, confident, outspoken, and unapologetically direct. He had built a reputation as a leader who never backed down, who spoke his mind without filters, and who believed that strength came from saying what others were too afraid to say. For some, that made him a symbol of fearless leadership. For others, it made him unpredictable, a wildcard in global politics. On the other side of the equation was Italy's president, a man of quiet power. He wasn't known for grand gestures or dramatic soundbites. Instead, he carried himself with calm intellect and quiet conviction. Where Trump used energy and presence, Italy's president used patience and precision. He believed that diplomacy wasn't about who spoke the loudest, but about who understood the most. Behind closed doors, advisors on both sides whispered their concerns. Italian aides warned their president that Trump might dominate the conversation, steering it his way as he often did. American staffers, in turn, worried that Italy's president might use his intellectual, professorial tone, the kind that could come off as condescending to someone who prized directness. Both sides prepared for tension, not harmony. But when the two men finally met in that elegant Roman hall, something unexpected happened. Mutual respect. They shook hands, firmly and confidently, each testing the other's energy for just a moment before both broke into genuine smiles. Cameras flashed, microphones caught the polite greetings, and then the two leaders sat down to talk. At first, everything was smooth, almost too smooth. They discussed economics, global energy challenges, and the future of cooperation between the United States and Europe. It was calm, professional, and perfectly diplomatic. Then the conversation turned toward leadership. President Donald Trump leaned back, speaking with his trademark confidence. He talked about strength, decision-making, and the courage to stand tall even when the world disagrees. His words filled the room, commanding, assertive, and sharp. That's when Italy's president slowly leaned forward, eyes steady, and delivered one quiet line that froze everyone in place. He said, "True strength isn't in speaking the loudest, it's in listening the longest." For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The sound of cameras clicking faded. The faint echo of footsteps in the hall disappeared. Every person in that grand marble room froze. as if those words had sucked the air right out of it. No one moved. No one dared to speak. Even the translators, trained to instantly echo every syllable, hesitated. It was as though they were unsure whether to translate what had just been said, or to simply let it hang in the air. The sentence was calm, simple, and quiet. But it carried weight. It wasn't confrontational. It wasn't meant as a challenge. It was something far more powerful. It was truth. President Giorgia Meloni hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't gestured dramatically. She just spoke, firmly, sincerely, with eyes locked on President Donald Trump. And that was enough. Trump blinked, studying her for a moment. The man who was famous for his instant comebacks, his rapid-fire replies, and his absolute command of any room, said nothing. He simply looked at her, not with anger, not with frustration, but with something rare for him: reflection. Because deep down, even President Donald Trump knew that what President Giorgia Meloni had said wasn't just a clever line. It was a mirror, a reminder that leadership isn't always about volume or dominance. Sometimes it's about patience, the ability to hear what others cannot say, and to understand what isn't being spoken out loud. Reporters who were in the room later described that moment as electric, like the atmosphere had shifted. The tension that had built up during the earlier discussions melted into something almost peaceful. It was no longer about two leaders trying to outshine each other. It was about two very different visions of power finally meeting face to face. Trump finally nodded slowly. Then a faint smile appeared. Not his usual confident grin, but something subtler, almost respectful. It was the kind of smile that silently said, "I didn't expect that, but I respect it." That one quiet sentence from President Giorgia Meloni had done something extraordinary. It had silenced one of the world's most outspoken voices, and in that silence, the world heard something new. The moment didn't stay behind closed doors for long. In today's world, nothing ever really does. Within just a few hours, whispers turned into headlines, and headlines exploded into global news stories. Major outlets across the world began picking up the story. Trump speechless after Italy's president's remark. Rome meeting takes surprising turn. Words that silenced $1 billion voice. It was everywhere. On television, online, and across every social media platform you can imagine. Clips from the meeting began circulating. Commentators dissected every frame, every gesture, every pause. And of course, the quote itself spread like wildfire. True strength isn't in speaking the loudest. It's in listening the longest. Soon, it was on memes, motivational posts, coffee mugs, and even t-shirts. Influencers used it in videos about leadership and emotional intelligence. Business coaches quoted it in their seminars. Teachers used it to inspire students. It became more than just a political moment. It became a global message. But beyond the viral buzz and trending hashtags, something deeper was happening. People began reflecting on the meaning behind those words. Because whether you agreed with President Donald Trump or not, everyone knew one thing. He was one of the most commanding, dominant communicators of his time, a man whose voice could fill stadiums, whose speeches drew millions, whose words had shaped global headlines for years. For someone like that to fall silent, even for a moment, meant something truly powerful had been said. Even some of Trump's strongest supporters admitted that it was a rare, almost humanizing moment. They didn't see it as weakness, they saw it as real. Because in that quiet pause, the world saw a side of leadership that often gets lost amid the noise. Humility. Talk shows debated it for days. Political analysts wrote essays about it. And while the internet argued over the implications, one thing was undeniable. President Giorgia Meloni's simple, calm truth had cut through the noise of politics and touched something universal. It reminded everyone, watching that true leadership isn't about who can talk the longest, it's about who has the courage to listen. And in that sense, the silence that followed her words spoke louder than any speech ever could. Weeks later, when journalists asked President Donald Trump about that unforgettable meeting in Rome, he didn't dodge the question, nor did he deny what happened. With his signature grin, he simply said, "Italy's a beautiful country, and their president's a smart man." It wasn't a long statement. It wasn't a typical fiery Trump soundbite, but it didn't need to be. Those few words carried something far more meaningful than a press conference could reveal. A quiet acknowledgement. Behind that grin, behind the careful choice of words, There was respect. And maybe, just maybe, a bit of reflection too. Political commentators and analysts from around the world couldn't stop talking about it. They said that moment, that single silent pause between two of the most distinct leaders on the global stage, became a quiet turning point. Not just for President Donald Trump, but for anyone who witnessed it. It was a reminder that no matter how powerful, how outspoken, or how influential a person becomes, there's still room for humility. There's still power in listening. Because sometimes, words, the right words, can humble even the strongest among us. And maybe that's the real story here. In a world overflowing with noise, where everyone is talking, posting, debating, and shouting over one another, President Giorgia Meloni reminded us of something profoundly simple. Silence can be stronger than sound. Her message wasn't just for one man, it was for everyone. She showed that leadership isn't measured by how loudly you speak, but by how deeply you understand. That being heard doesn't always mean raising your voice. Sometimes, it means pausing long enough to hear what others have to say. Even the most confident voices can learn something new when faced with wisdom spoken softly. And that, in itself, is a rare and powerful form of strength. As this story continued to echo across political halls, social media platforms, and dinner table conversations around the world, one truth became undeniable. That day in Rome wasn't just about diplomacy or politics. It was about two worlds colliding, the world of bold words and the world of quiet wisdom. And in that historic moment, for once, silence truly spoke louder than words.